Hello, this is Domenico again with Easynomics, and we're going to look at macro. This is a second scenario with demand pull of inflation applied to a Keynesian model. And again, we're using the same example, the same historical example, where prior to the September 11th attack, interest rates were at about 6% in the United States. And then the September 11th attack hit. That reduced consumer and business confidence. There was the concern that consumption and investment spending was going to fall. And we could see that the central bank reacted immediately by engaging in expansionary monetary policy, expanding the supply of money to reduce interest rates, to incentivize households and firms to borrow money that is now cheap to borrow. And as they borrow that money, it's leading to increased consumption and investment spending. That increased borrowing and spending was going into the housing sector, as we saw in this graph, and how there is a sudden increase, according to this home price index, in the lead up to 2005. So that's going to be our example again. Okay, so here we have, I'll label this scenario number two. Scenario number two, where we're looking at demand pull of inflation as applied to the Keynesian model. And again, we're going to use the example of expansionary monetary policy causing this. And to review again, expansionary monetary policy is dealing with the role of the central bank. And in this case, with expansion, the supply of money is increasing in the money markets. So the central bank is printing money, and that reduces interest rates. Interest rates falls. Okay. So here we have, we'll make some notes on this side, where aggregate demand equals the Keynesian aggregate supply curve. It provides an equilibrium level of real GDP. Real GDP is at full potential, GDP at YP. We've achieved full employment, which is equal to the natural rate of unemployment, which is equal to the sum of structural plus frictional plus seasonal unemployment. So the long-run average level of unemployment in the United States over decades, we're going to assume is about 5%. And then we also have an equilibrium price level at PL2. There's a modest level of inflation. We'll say it's about 2%. All right, so at PL2, we have about 2% inflation at point A. So the economy is doing quite well. But unfortunately, the central bank is maintaining expansionary monetary policy. They're maintaining that increased supply of money. It's maintaining that the interest rates are low, and so that's incentivizing households and firms to borrow. Aggregate demand is the sum of consumption spending, investment spending, government spending, and exports minus imports. And the cheap loanable funds is leading to households borrowing and spending, firms also borrowing and spending, and people buying brand new homes and apartments is leading to that investment spending, that physical capital, brand new physical capital that's being produced and consumed. And so that's rising. That causes aggregate demand to shift out from 81 to 82. Okay, so here we have 82 intersecting with the Keynesian aggregate supply curve, and that's leading to an increase in output, a slight increase in output at Y inflation. We're getting increased aggregate demand that's causing an increase in the quantity of aggregate supply. So firms are quickly trying to employ the last remaining scarce resources like labor to meet that increased aggregate demand, to produce just a little bit more output because there's not enough inputs to produce more output. So we're really meeting the limitations of our ability to produce more output because we're fully employing our inputs. So we're at point B. So real GDP increases. We see unemployment fall again to perhaps about 3%. That's a signal to macroeconomists that the economy is potentially overheating. And we have the price level rising dramatically. All right, we see it's rising to PL3. Perhaps inflation is not going up to 4 or 5%. So definitely we have entered an inflationary gap. Okay, so that's the same concept of demand pull inflation applied to the Keynesian model. And I'll just go ahead and analyze this as we would on a paper one exam. As can be seen, we have graph A illustrating demand pull inflation, increased aggregate demand leading to rising price level, and this is a result of expansionary monetary policy. On the x-axis, we're measuring real GDP. On the y-axis, we're measuring the price level. We have a downward aggregate demand curve labeled AD1, and we have a Keynesian aggregate supply curve composed of three sections. Section 1 being horizontal, where there's spare capacity. Section 2, where we're achieving full employment. And Section 3, where we have fully employed our inputs and we can only get a fixed quantity of outputs. So any increase in AD just leads to an increase in the price level. Where AD1 equals the Keynesian aggregate supply curve, we have an equilibrium level of GDP at YP, at full potential GDP. We've achieved full employment, which is equal to the natural rate of unemployment, which is the sum of structural plus frictional plus seasonal unemployment. At that point, we're assuming that the U.S. economy has a full employment level of about 5% unemployment. The equilibrium price level is set at PL2, so we have a moderate level of inflation, perhaps at 2%. Due to the central bank maintaining expansionary monetary policy, where there's an increasing supply of money leading to falling interest rates, that incentivizes households to borrow the cheap money with the low interest rates, causing consumption spending to rise and also causing firms to borrow those cheap loanable funds. And as households buy new physical capital, households and apartment, that also causes investment spending to increase. Thus, aggregate demand increases from 81 to 82, setting a new equilibrium where 82 equals the Keynesian aggregate supply curve, providing a new equilibrium price level at PL3. Thus, inflation is rising from 2% to 4%, and a new equilibrium level of real GDP at Y inflation. That increased aggregate demand causes firms to increase the quantity of their aggregate supply. They're quickly employing resources that are becoming increasingly scarce. Unemployment falls to 3%, and we have entered an inflationary gap at point B. So this illustrates demand pull inflation, aggregate demand increasing as a result of expansionary monetary policy, leading to an increase in the price level and a slight increase in real GDP. And that's it. Thanks so much. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and to comment if you have any questions.